This case is so twisted you might think it's from a movie and not real life, but every detail is disturbingly true. A woman, cold, calculated, married a man, built a life with him, bore his child, only to take everything away in the most unimaginable way. She sat across from him at the dinner table, watching, waiting. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "This is really good," he said, not knowing what he was eating, not knowing the truth sitting across from him. Then she told him. Every detail, every lie, every step she took to bring him to this exact moment. His hands started shaking. His stomach lurched. He tried to spit it out, tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't move. She just watched, expressionless, cold, done. By the time the police arrived, she was still sitting there, calm, waiting. Now, was she a monster? Or was this justice? Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This case will leave you questioning everything. Before she was the woman at that dinner table, before she became the face on every news channel, she was just a mother. A mother who loved her child more than anything. A mother who had her entire world ripped away in a single moment. It was late. The sun had set, but the streetlights weren't enough to cut through the shadows. A 5-year-old child, small, fragile, was just a few steps ahead of his mother. Maybe he was laughing. Maybe he was calling for her. The details? They don't matter. Because in the next second, tires screeched, metal hit flesh, thump. The car never stopped. Just gone. No hesitation. No brake lights. Whoever was behind the wheel had just erased a life and didn't even care. Now imagine this, you're the mother. You drop to your knees, screaming, because there's nothing else you can do. Your baby is broken, lifeless, and there's nothing you can do to bring him back. How do you come back from that? The police did what they always do. Took a report. Filed it away. We'll do our best. But we know how these cases go. No witnesses. No clear footage. No justice. Just grief. And grief? It does things to people. Some drown in it. Some let it consume them. But some turn it into something else. And that's exactly what she did. She wiped her tears, buried her son, and made herself a promise. She would find the driver. And when she did, she wouldn't just take his life. She'd make him feel everything she felt. She wasn't reckless about it. No angry social media rants. No showing up at police stations screaming for justice. That's how people get written off as just another grieving mother. Another sad story shuffled into a file and forgotten. No, she was smarter than that. She played the long game. Patient. Calculated. At first, it was just her sitting in front of the TV watching the news, hoping for a lead. Waiting for someone to care. But no updates came. No new witnesses. No justice. So she did what the police refused to do. She spent nights staring at accident reports, combing through online forums, joining hit-and-run victim groups, looking for patterns, looking for answers. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. But she didn't stop. Because while everyone else moved on, she was still there. Then she found it. A grainy security camera image. A car. A license plate, partially visible. Not enough for police to track down, but enough for her. She worked backward. DMV records? Off limits. But car dealerships? Insurance companies? They make mistakes. And people? People believe what they want to believe. So she became whoever she needed to be. A frantic wife looking for her husband's policy. A concerned citizen reporting an abandoned car. Every phone call, every lie, leading her one step closer. Until finally, a name. A face. An address. And just like that, she was looking at him. David. Not a monster. Not a criminal. Just a man. A businessman. A guy who went home every night to his expensive apartment, ate dinner, and slept peacefully, while her son rotted in the ground. He had no idea what he had done. No idea that somewhere, a woman was staring at his picture with rage so cold it didn't even burn anymore. She could have ended it right then. Waited for him outside his office. Slit his throat in the parking lot. Poisoned his drink at a bar. But that would have been too easy. Too merciful. He didn't deserve easy. No, she had a better idea. She would make him love her. And when he did, she would take away from him what he took from her. What would you do if the person you hated most in the world was also the person you had to seduce? Most people couldn't stomach it. But she did. She erased herself. Every trace of the grieving mother, gone. No more tired eyes from sleepless nights spent crying. No more clothes that smelled like old grief. No more bitterness curling her lips every time she saw a child laughing in the street. That woman? She had to die. And from the ashes, Someone else was born. A new name. A new look. A new history. Not a widow of tragedy, but a woman with a purpose. Elena was dead. The woman who walked into that coffee shop that day, who stood just close enough for David to notice her, she was a stranger. Not just to him. To herself. She had practiced this moment in the mirror 1,000 times. The way she would tuck her hair behind her ear just enough to seem shy. The way she'd glance at him, hold his gaze for a beat too long, then look away like she wasn't supposed to. Wait, and David? He took it. Funny how easy it was. A few stolen glances. A random meeting at the grocery store. A well-placed laugh at the right joke. A brush of her fingers against his wrist, just light enough to make him crave more. Men like him? They never see it coming. Within weeks they were dating. Within months he was in love. Or at least he thought he was. She knew exactly how to shape herself into the woman of his dreams. The perfect balance of independence and vulnerability. Enough mystery to keep him chasing, enough warmth to make him feel like he was winning. And the best part? He never once suspected a thing. Not once did he look into her past. Not once did he wonder why a woman like her just happened to appear in his life at the perfect moment. He thought he had found love. But what he had really found was his executioner. And when he got down on one knee, when he slipped that ring onto her finger, grinning like he had just won something, she smiled too. Because she had just won something much bigger. Control. David wasn't a bad man. At least, not in the way people think of bad men. He didn't hit her. He didn't scream. He never made her feel unsafe. If anything, he was the opposite. He was patient. Gentle. The kind of man who rubbed her feet at the end of a long day, who kissed the top of her head while she cooked, who whispered "I love you" before rolling over to sleep. And the worst part? He meant it. She could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her. The way his gaze softened when she smiled. The way he reached for her hand instinctively even in public. If she were someone else, she might have loved him back. But she wasn't. And he wasn't just David. He was the man who killed her son. That was the thought that kept her grounded. That was the truth she whispered to herself every time his arms wrapped around her. And the baby. Oh, the baby. She never planned on keeping it. That first moment, when she saw the test, when the 2 pink lines stared back at her, she almost panicked. This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to marry him. Earn his trust. Then take him apart, piece by piece, the same way he had done to her. But then she felt it. The first flutter of movement. The first kick. The first proof that life could still exist inside of her, even after everything she had lost. And for the first time in years, she hesitated. Maybe this was her second chance. Maybe this child wasn't his. Maybe it was hers. Maybe. But then he held their newborn for the first time, his hands so gentle against that soft pink skin, and whispered, "He's perfect." And just like that, the illusion shattered. Perfect? Perfect? How dare he? How dare he sit there, smiling, holding his son like he was a gift. Like he hadn't already stolen one child from her. Like he wasn't a murderer. That was the moment she knew. This wasn't her baby. This was his. She watched him that night, rocking the infant to sleep, humming under his breath. He had no idea. He had no idea that his entire world was already collapsing. That the woman who kissed him goodnight wasn't his wife, she was his executioner. And that the baby in his arms? She was never meant to grow up. She didn't love the baby. She didn't even try. From the moment she first held him in the hospital, wrapped in that sterile blue blanket, she felt nothing. No warmth, no joy, just a dull, numbing hatred curling in the pit of her stomach. The child looked too much like him. The same soft brown eyes. The same dimples that deepened when he smiled, just like his father's. Every coo, every tiny hand that reached for her, it all made her stomach turn. She refused to bond with him. Never rocked him to sleep. Never whispered lullabies in the quiet of the night. When he cried, she let him. Minutes. Hours. It didn't matter. David, oblivious, would pick him up, shushing him with gentle hums, never questioning why his wife sat stone-faced, staring at the wall instead of their son. Neighbors noticed, of course. So did family. He's still so young, they said. She just needs time to connect. She's been through so much. But they didn't see the way she flinched when the baby reached for her. Didn't hear the ice in her voice when she spoke to him, if she spoke at all. Didn't see the bruises. The time she gripped his arm too hard, left him to shiver in a cold crib, withheld food just enough to make him weak but not enough to raise suspicion. David saw, though. He had to have seen. The way their son never went to his mother for comfort. The way he stiffened under her touch. The way he cried harder when left alone with her. But he ignored it. Because believing the truth meant facing something unbearable. And that was easier to swallow than the idea that he had married a woman incapable of love. That he had married a woman who had never once seen their son as a person. Only as a weapon. The plan was simple. Plain. Precise. Unforgiving. She waited until the child was old enough to walk. Old enough for David to love. She needed him to feel what she had felt. Only then would it be enough. And the night it happened? It was just another dinner. She made his favorite meal. Set the table just right. Poured his drink, let the ice clink against the glass. She even smiled as she watched him take the first bite. He chewed. Swallowed. This is really good, he said, wiping his mouth. He reached for another bite. Another. She watched. And waited. And then, just as he was about to take another forkful, she told him. She told him everything. Every lie. Every truth. Every reason why the meat on his plate tasted so familiar. At first he laughed. A nervous chuckle like maybe she was joking. But when she didn't smile, when she didn't break character, his face changed. His hands started shaking. The fork clattered against the plate. His throat bobbed as he tried to speak, but no words came out. And then, the horror hit him. Because it wasn't just a story. It wasn't just some sick joke. It was real. His child, the one he had named, held, kissed goodnight, wasn't sleeping upstairs. Their son was inside him. She let him sit with that. Let him feel it. The nausea, the revulsion, the gut-wrenching agony. The same agony she had lived with every single day. And then, she just sat back and watched. No tears. No screaming. No remorse. Because as far as she was concerned, justice had been served. The sirens came fast. Too fast. Maybe David called 911 when the nausea hit, when the bile started rising and the room began to tilt. Or maybe it was when his brain finally caught up with reality, when he looked down at his trembling hands and realized what he had done. But honestly, she didn't care. She just sat there. Calm. Still. Unshaken. When the cops burst through the door, guns drawn, shouting orders, she didn't fight. Didn't run. Didn't even blink. She just turned to David, still hunched over the table, retching, gagging on the truth. And in that moment, she saw her son's face. Not the way he had looked in the morgue, cold and lifeless. Not the way she had been forced to identify his tiny body, wrapped in a sheet, stolen from her forever. But the way he used to be. Smiling. Oh. And that was enough. So, when they dragged her outside, when they pushed her into the back of the squad car and the red and blue lights washed over her, she didn't flinch. Didn't beg. Didn't scream. She just whispered, "It's done." The trial was a spectacle. Every detail of her revenge laid bare, the media feasting on her like vultures. The prosecution called her a monster. The defense tried to paint her as insane, a mother broken by grief. But none of it mattered. She never looked at the jury. Never pleaded for her life. Because she had already won. David? He wasn't so lucky. The weight of what he had done, what he had hidden, buried beneath layers of privilege and denial, it broke him. The guilt festered, ate him alive until he had no choice but to confess. The hit and run. The cover-up. That night, he hadn't been some devoted husband rushing home to his family. He had been a drunk man leaving a bar, barely sober enough to drive. He didn't see the boy until it was too late. He felt the impact, the sickening thud, but he didn't stop. He didn't stop. Instead, he kept driving, heart pounding, hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, convincing himself it wasn't his fault. That it had been dark. That the kid had come out of nowhere. That stopping wouldn't have changed anything. And maybe, if no one ever found out, it wouldn't have to change anything. So he went home. Washed the blood off his car. Climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling until the sun rose, waiting for the guilt to fade. But it never did. And years later, when he thought he had escaped it, when he let himself believe he had outrun his past, his crime came knocking on his door in the form of a woman he thought he loved. They locked him away too. A separate trial. A separate cell. But that was just a formality. His real prison? His mind. Because while she would spend the rest of her life behind bars, sitting in silence with no regrets, David would wake up every day knowing exactly what he had done. He would hear phantom cries in the night. See the boy's face in every shadow. Feel the weight of his loss in every breath. That was the real sentence. Not hers. But is justice ever really done? Some would say she was a monster. That she went too far. Others would say, David got exactly what he deserved. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more twisted stories like this. Because trust me, there's always another one.